Sarasota Bay Gulf to Bay Tidal Connection Effort and 2023 Strategic Planning BCC Policy Item, Health of the Bay, Midnight Pass, and Future Openings. And I see Mr. Anderson. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Commission. My name is Spencer Anderson, Public Works Director, and thank you for the time today to follow up on a couple different opportunities we've had to discuss the 2023 Strategic Planning Item, Health of the Bay and Midnight Pass, and Future Reopenings. What we have done as Public Works is continuing to do water quality improvements throughout the county. One of the focus points is the Little Sarasota Bay Watershed Master Plan. We have a consultant working on the scope of work for that now, and we'll come to the board with a contract to approve in the near future. That will include an evaluation of what water quality benefits could be occur if there was a Gulf to Bay tidal connection at that area within Little Sarasota Bay. We also in April had with a contract to approve in the near future. That will include an evaluation of what water quality benefits could be occur if there was a Gulf to Bay tidal connection at that area within Little Sarasota Bay. We also in April had the Executive Director of the Sarasota Bay National Estuary Program, David Tomasco. Dr. Tomasco came and gave a nice conversation with you all about water quality existing within Little Sarasota Bay and some of the work that he's done in his profession to similar type of efforts to reconnect areas that do not have a tidal connection to make them connected now. And then, as you know, in July, the governor did veto the $1 million state appropriation that we had requested for initiating work to do something with the Little Sarasota Bay water quality effort. And where we are now is looking at what's next steps. And I'm going to go over just a few.
We don't have anything on our screens.
No. Okay, so it's on. If we can.
Can we get IT? There you go. Thank you.
There we go. That's just the slide to recap what I had just discussed.
Okay. All right.
And so what I'm going to show you next is just a few options of what could be next steps for the Little Sarasota Bay Water Quality Improvement Program or action. I'm working on the scope of work for that now, and we'll come to the board with a contract to approve in the near future. That will include an evaluation of what water quality benefits could be occur if there was a Gulf to Bay tidal connection. The $1 million state appropriation discussed.
All right.
And so what I'm going to show you next is just a few options of what could be next steps for the Little Sarasota Bay Water Quality Improvement Program or a reconnection of a tidal connection between the Gulf and Little Sarasota Bay. The first is, in 2004 to 2008, the board initiated a significant design and permitting effort to construct a tidal inlet at the historic Midnight Pass location. That was born out of a 2000 feasibility study to determine whether building an engineered inlet at that location was feasible as far as the coastal environment, what size would it generally need to be, is a mitigation that's required because there is seagrasses that will be impacted, mangroves that would be impacted. Is there an appropriate mitigation plan that could be done to mitigate for those impacts? The nut of that was yes, a engineered inlet could be constructed at this location. It would need to be roughly 300 square meters of cross-sectional area to be an opening in the beach that currently exists at Midnight Pass all the way to the Intercoastal Waterway. And there was a peer review of that study in 2000, and it came back with largely a similar consensus that yes, it could be done. We might have done a couple things differently here. We might have done something in addition here. But yes, we agree with the feasibility study's outcome that you could design an engineered inlet at that location. And so the 2004 to 2008 pretty much took that feasibility study conclusions and implemented them into an engineered design. We brought on coastal engineers, biologists, environmental groups, and also to put together a very comprehensive engineering package that we submitted to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection for a joint coastal permit. That goes to the Army Corps, other federal agencies, primarily the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we spent 4 years working on that effort to permit the engineered open inlet at that location. The FDEP issued a notice of intent to deny, and ultimately the Board of County Commissioners, when we talked about this at that time, the Board of County Commissioners decided to withdraw those permits instead of having a denial on the record. And since that was a, let's go away to live to fight another day, and that's kind of where we left that. In 2013, a private entity, Midnight Pass Society 2, I believe, they actually filed a lawsuit against the DEP for that denial, or that intent to deny. Ultimately, that case was dismissed. There was a meeting that followed that, and at that point, there was no further action from the County Commission with respect to this effort. Okay, so one of the options is to resume that effort, pick up where we left off, dust it off, and start that effort back over again. There's significant cost of what that project was. At the time, the cost of that project was $14.5 million to construct the initial inlet plus the mitigation plan. Today, it's probably 2 to 3 times that much for the initial project construction. The 9-year total, all these projects will have a large beach renourishment plan that goes with it to make sure, one of the goals of that project was to make sure Casey Key was made whole, that their beaches would remain nourished with sand from that project. So the 9-year total at that time was $61 million for everything that you had to do from start of construction all the way through 9 years. So that's an active maintenance. You know, every year or so you'll have to go in to get the new pass into a stable condition over a period of time. Okay, so doing that, we spent just over $1 million on that effort. If we were to go through continuing that effort, I expect it to be a similar cost. You could pick up some of that, but it'd be a lot of it you'd have to go out and redo. Seagrass surveys, maybe some of the geotechnical work, but then reinitiating the permitting effort. Because we withdrew, we'd have to restart. Okay? And then the long-term cost of initial construction is, like I said, you know, it was $14.5 million, anywhere from 2 to 3 times that for a new construction effort. It doesn't take into account the longer-term costs of the maintenance and then the pass stabilization. The next option would be to, let's kind of go back in time and look at doing a new feasibility study. One of the biggest issues with the 2008 effort was the regulatory agencies weren't really on board with us. There was not a whole lot of political support beyond the county for that project. Resuming a new feasibility study would also give us the opportunity to evaluate what might be an option instead of a fully engineered inlet from the intercoastal waterway to the Gulf. So the contemplation of, could it be a piped connection? Could it be something other than the inlet? That'll allow us to evaluate that more thoroughly, obtain updated information, and most importantly, to develop a relationship with the regulators that are in place today in association with our political support we have at the state and federal levels. So that's an option that it may take a little longer, but it is, in my opinion, if we were going to do something for this Little Sarasota Bay project, is an appropriate step to restart an effort so we have the full picture instead of going down a path we already were bumping our head up against a good amount of resistance. So this will allow us, I think, most importantly, to get the regulating agencies on board and be partners in this effort. And the costs to that are relatively similar. You would have to have an initial cost for the feasibility study anywhere between $250,000 to $500,000. It's just a swag, but it will depend on what the scope of work ultimately is that we would solicit for that work. And then followed by your design and permitting, probably a couple $1 million there, and then the $25 to $40 million of initial construction costs. Okay, and then the third option, and these are not the only options, these are 3 options just for discussion purposes, and then always we have a no action option, right? And that is just, we've done a lot of work so far, we haven't had much success since the late 80s on doing anything. The board could consider this to be an end game, and let's not do anything more at this time, spend any more resources. So that is the third option that I have here. And ultimately, today we're looking for the board to help us with some direction.
Okay, Commissioner Rainford beat Commissioner Nunder to the board. No, Commissioner Rainford.
So yeah, just for discussion purposes, unless anybody has a question for Spencer right off the bat here, I think that it behooves us to coordinate with our state and federal partners, because obviously there's going to be a big funding issue in the future. But with that being said, I also want to make sure we're moving forth as fast as possible to address this. So just laying that out there at the front end of the conversation. Looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say.
Okay.
Am I recognized?
Are you on the board? Oh, there you go. Okay. Commissioner Nunder.
Well, thank you, Chair. Wow, it sounds like Commissioner Rainford, you're on board for this project. That makes me very happy. And I mean, you guys know where I stand on this, where I have stood on this for a long time. And Spencer, thank you for the information, the history, and I certainly have been doing my homework on this. My position really, I think this project is so important, as we saw from almost 700 responses through that Resilient SRQ route that we tried to take. Unfortunately, I guess the funds aren't available there. But this is a situation where we want to measure twice and cut once. And not to oversimplify this situation, because this is a passionate project for me and a lot of people in this community, and those of us that have grown up here and we've seen the bumper stickers, et cetera. I think what we want to do is in-house start getting some buy-in, and option B to me looked like the most logical. Of course, my ears are open and I'm listening to my colleagues, but I think that if we can start the internal process of doing some of the engineering studies and then show our state and federal legislators that we have some buy-in to this project, the fund allocation or process of getting fund allocation to support this project, I believe, would be easier. I don't think it's a secret that our Congressman Stubbe's on board, and we've got some state legislators that are on board with this project. I believe it's a very good project for water quality, amongst other things that are tangential to this process. So I think that the measure twice, cut once is going to be key here. I have had some conversations with regulatory agency people, I'm happy to do the work, on how do we not have any mistakes? What is it that they're looking for? I'm not interested in reinventing the wheel here. In fact, I'd like to be told what are they looking for and how do we get there as an organization? So, you know, I think there was another project, Blind Paths was very similar in nature, and you had mentioned inlets, and I'm not sure if an inlet in your mind, and I know you're the coastal engineering background, so help me understand, does that involve some sort of hardening? Is that something like, are you talking about a jetty? What is an inlet in your mind? Because in my mind, I'm looking for restoration of a historical tidal connection between the Gulf of Mexico and our intercoastal waterway.
Well, Blind Pass is a similar effort, and
Right.
where they connected the Gulf to
Correct.
the intercoastal, right?
Correct.
And for the inlet here, there is no hardening proposed.
Okay.
It could be hardened, much like Venice Inlet is, where that's a hardened jetty that goes out into the Gulf. The intent of this, one of the goals was to not have a hardened inlet, but it just a dredged opening between the Gulf and the intercoastal waterway, engineered in a way that it was intended to be stable and also maintained and seeded with appropriate sand sources, so we do have appropriate development of the nearshore environment to make the long-term stability of the inlet without a hardened structure.
Fantastic, and I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly what I would be looking for here at the seat. Looking for something the way perhaps Mother Nature had it for hundreds of years, right? Making sure that some of our Casey Key constituents down there are made whole with the whole sand accretion component. We want to make sure things are not deprived or overly fed, right? We want to keep it as natural and respectful as possible. So I'll hold. I'll be listening.
And I just put, sorry to interrupt, but the previous effort, the goals and objectives that are listed on this slide here were the goals and objectives from the feasibility study. And those are the four major tenets of the project. I don't think those would change, right? Those 4 things here: improve water exchange and flushing. That's your water quality, and restore productivity to the ecosystem, another water quality effort. Stabilize adjacent beaches while providing high-quality sand source. That's exactly what we're talking about here. And then provide improved recreational opportunities. Those are the things, whether there's an open inlet or a culverted connection, the recreational opportunities are assumed to be improved.
Okay, can you move that to B? I'd like to see the option B. Okay. All right, so any further questions, discussions for Spencer on this? Commissioner Rundle.
One more, thank you, Chair, no one else. So if presumably, or if this moves forward on this, do you anticipate, or is there any communication synergy with some of the regulatory agencies that you guys, as Sarasota County staff, will have to make sure that we are going in the absolute right direction? I think that we need to consult the experts for sure. And I certainly have appreciated Dr. Tomasco's input and his expertise, as he has also done similar projects in Puerto Rico and on the East Coast as it relates to restoring historical tidal connections and pathways. So do you anticipate having conversations with DEP, any regulatory agency, as this process moves forward, so that we're basically doing what is required to move the project forward?
That's the first bullet on number B, on option B there, is absolutely. I think that we have to start with that.
Okay.
Instead of waiting until we get a permit design to send it to them and get their opinion, we need to get something that they think would be permittable from the start. So when they see it, it's something that they're expecting. And there was a significant amount of regulatory coordination with the last effort. I think that doing it now, we may have different personalities and people involved, and also the political support we have from the state and the federal levels is significantly important.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, thank you.
Speaking of that, I know we had the $1 million request in, and that did get turned down. We're moving forward again on that with kind of a different sponsor, I believe. Is that right, Spencer?
That's correct.
So, and then, to Commissioner Nunder's point, for planning, they have what is called a pre-application meeting. And you sit down with all the folks ahead of time so that when you're putting your application in, you're aware of where the issues are and what you need to do and all that. And I think that would be really great in this process as well to, before we really get out of the gate, to sit down with the regulatory authorities and get their feedback, their input, on all the issues, the obstacles, because there's going to be obstacles here. What are we facing and how do we deal with those? How do we mitigate them? Do we have to look at complete opening, or does it look like if they're not going to approve that, or that we're looking at some structure to allow for flushing or something? I'm just so that we kind of go in with our eyes open and know what they're looking for.
That would be the intent of the feasibility study, is to look at the alternatives and then bring that discussion back to the board at least at one instance, it's not more, to have that discussion so you're informed and can give us guidance as we go on.
Okay. All right, any further discussion on this? Commissioner Rainford.
Spencer, can you just weigh in on the time frame one more time? If we're looking at B here, to initiate a new concept feasibility study, what is that? There's other things that have to take place in the bullet points, but what does that time frame look like in your opinion?
Conservatively, probably a year.
Thank you. And if you're being reckless.
Sorry, sir, your mic wasn't on. I couldn't
if
hear
you're
you.
being reckless, what would it be?
It's really hard for me to say at this point. It depends on the actual work we need to do. If there's work that has to be done on a seasonality basis, sometimes there are, for us to get a better picture of what's necessary. So it depends on when we get the actual work assignment issued or a contract issued and what has to be done.
Okay.
So once we have that better information, I could give you better insight on the time frame.
Thank you.
And just to follow up on that, from a directive from the board's perspective, what is the financial ask to move forward with that? Because I know you said there's some alternate funding potentially from a different source than before. What does that look like to get this ball just moving forward as fast as possible?
I think we would develop the funding and then bring that back to you along with some kind of work assignment if it had to come back to the board for your approval.
Time period on that, assuming that we give direction?
He's going to have to put together the scenarios. As he said, that number was a swag. He'd put it together. They have to define the scope. We'd create a CIP and bring it back to the board for approval.
Okay. Commissioner Nunder
Yeah,
I believe, has a question for
I have a
John.
question for our county administrator. So Jonathan, just help me understand. I think I see where Commissioner Rainford is going with this. If we were to take action on B today, does that presume to our state delegation and our congressmen on the federal level that we are now, as Sarasota County government, taking some buy-in for this project, and therefore may we humbly request some funds or look for funds to help us with this endeavor?
Yeah, and Rob Lewis and I actually talked about that. And yes, we do believe it should, as you mentioned, that the county commission is putting their resources into it. The details of how we would bring it forward, how to get it into the budget is different, but it would certainly ring that bell
Okay.
from our perspective.
I think that's what, with Commissioner Rainford, I think that's where he is going, and I'm completely on board. And in fact, I'm hoping that does send a message to our colleagues in Tallahassee and in Washington that, we're certainly trying our darndest here to get this ball moving. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we've had a discussion on this. Do we have, entertain a motion on this item?
Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Nunder.
Oh, and Jonathan, perhaps what vernacular would be appropriate here as far as you're concerned to get this ball moving forward?
I
How do we
think if you guys are in support of, it sounds like there's a lot of discussion around B, is just to direct staff to take the appropriate steps to initiate option B and go forward.
What he said.
So moved, all right?
Second.
So moved and
Don't want to
seconded.
miss anything.
Okay, so we have a motion by Commissioner Nunder, seconded by Commissioner Rainford. Any further discussion on that? Seeing none, we will call the question. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. That moves forward 5-0. Thank you for the report, Spencer.
you.
I do have a card from Michael Holderness, but we'll bring you up open to the public in just a few minutes for that, if you still want to speak. Okay, because that was a discussion item, not a public hearing. Okay, with that, we move to our public hearings. Item number 41, Planning and Development Services, A, to adopt ordinance number 2023-0